Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are joining from. Welcome. My name's Stephen Trainer, and we're going to be talking about cityscapes, skylines, and tall buildings in Photo Ephemeris Web. And for that, we'll be using a whole bunch of relatively new features that have been added recently. So this may be your first look at some of those. It's great to have you with us. This webinar is intended for it's not a beginner's webinar, that's for sure. So hopefully you have some familiarity with the app. Ideally, you will have used the Geodetics tool before, and you will have maybe experimented with visual search. Those are two tools that we're going to be using quite a lot today. Let's talk about in detail what we're going to do today. Click there and page down. There we are. So I've done the introduction. We're going to talk about two examples, two scenarios, if you will, for planning photographs. And I thought as this webinar, I'm doing this one again tomorrow morning, but this session is timed so that folks in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that part of the world, hopefully can join. It's Saturday morning or early Saturday afternoon your time. So I figured we'd talk about an Australian location for folks who are joining from that part of the world. And then we're going to look at a supermoon over Manhattan, which is sort of more of a reconstruction exercise for a photo that was taken 10 years ago. And I'm going to emphasize slightly different emphasis in each of these examples as to what we'll look at. We should have plenty of time for questions, so don't hesitate to ask those. Here is, well, let's talk about the Australian Parliament building first. I'll give you a quick look at that. That's the building. It's in Canberra, which is sort of midway between Sydney and Melbourne in the capital territory in Australia. And I think the building dates from the 70s, I think. I may be wrong. I didn't check that before I ventured a date, so forgive me if I'm incorrect about that. But you can see it has this rather striking structure on top, and the flag flies from the center of that. This is a photograph from the Wikipedia page, and we'll delve back in there to get a little bit of extra information shortly. The second scenario we're going to talk about is this page. So I was looking for some example photos to test some of the stuff out with, and if you Google supermoon Manhattan, this is one of the top hits. It's from 2012. It was published in the Atlantic, taken by one of their, I think, staff photographers. And we're going to use this as our second example this evening or this morning, and see if we can use Photo Ephemeris to say, when could you get that shot? And we'll look at when you could have got it when it was taken, and time permitting, we'll look at when we next could achieve that. So let me switch over to my web browser, and I'm in Photo Ephemeris. I'm logged in as myself. It's at a location here in Boulder where we are located. I've got Google Maps selected, and it's set to today's date. So let's go through the process of looking at this Canberra scenario. So click search, type Canberra, hit return. I'll take that first result, and let's just get our bearings a little bit. I'm guessing most of you may not have been to Canberra, but if you have, you'll know that there's a lot of greenery, lots of water around the city centre. This here, right where the Canberra label is, that is the Australian the Parliament building. And it has a view. That photograph I showed you earlier from Wikipedia, I think, is taken in this direction, sort of looking like that. Let me just show you that again. So yeah, there it is. So it's looking, I guess, most south-ish, southwest-ish. And what I'm going to do, I saved this location earlier. So I'm just going to go to my saved locations, type in webinar, and we're going to start here at the Australian Parliament building. So there it is. And if I click satellite view, you can see that the red pin is directly on top of the central structure of the building. Let me zoom out a little bit. Now, if you were imagining, the prime purpose of the tools we're talking about tonight is identifying and planning shot opportunities when you could photograph any of the sun, the moon, or the galactic center, the center of the Milky Way, essentially positioned close in juxtaposition or directly behind or directly above a man-made object, such as a building or a structure. So that's what we're talking about. These are all shots where the sun, the moon, or the galactic center are in the frame of view, rather than illuminating another subject, for example, or maybe set off, you know, in a wide-angle shot somewhere where it doesn't matter too much exactly where they're located. This is for those precise alignment shots. That's what we're talking about today. Let's look at this scenario. Let's say we wanted, I'm going to switch this to the map, just it's a little bit easier to see the lines on a standard map than on the satellite map. Let's imagine we wanted to photograph a moon located directly on top of that structure. So I'm talking about putting a moon essentially on top of the flagpole or behind the flagpole. How could we do that? Well, first of all, you'd have to identify somewhere where you could get a view of the Parliament building. Now, for example, if I were to take, this is using Google Street View, if I drop that somewhere there and have a look around, if I were slightly not off axis, you can see from the map though, there's sort of a straight view down towards the building itself. But the trouble is that's looking directly south. And here in the southern hemisphere, the moon and the sun, as you see as I'm adjusting the time slider, they rise in the east, they set in the west, just like in the northern hemisphere, but they track to the north, not to the south. So we'd be very unlikely to find a moon in this direction here. We really want to get the moon lowish in the sky. We want to be photographing it from this area or this area over here. So I did a little bit of experimenting, and you can do this yourselves. And if you know the location, you probably know some of the places you could get the viewpoint from. But I found that if I were to have a look here down this area to the east, and behind the tree there, but let's have a spin around a little bit, see what we can see. Slightly, yeah, I probably need to be. Let me drop it a little bit further. Hold on a second. I'm really talking about around here. There we go. And from here, you can see, there it is. It's just there. I don't know if I can, yeah, I can zoom in a bit. There's a nasty crane in the way when this shot was taken. But there is the top of the structure that we're going to try and position the moon over. So to do that, I did save that location as well. What I'm going to do, I'm going to enable the Geodetics tool. That's this button to the right of the map. Click that, drops the extra gray pin. Hopefully you're all somewhat familiar with this, in its default position to the east. I'm now going to use the saved location, that seems to be called the boathouse. And I'm going to set the gray pin to that location there. One question you need to ask is, where should the red pin be and where should the gray pin be? Generally, the rule of thumb is that the red pin is the object that is illuminated. Now, oftentimes that would be the subject of the shot. So for example, if you were photographing here in Colorado, you were photographing a mountain in the Rockies, and you were looking to get the light onto the peak, you would put the red pin generally on the peak. That is the subject of the shot. It is the thing that is being illuminated. However, in this situation, if you think about it, the thing that's really being illuminated is our camera, because we want the moon in the shot. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to swap these two pins around. The red pin there, that's for when the shot includes the moon or includes the sun or the galactic center. Generally, you want the red pin is your location, you, the photographer. And the gray pin sits on top of the structure here in Canberra. So let's look at a few things. Now, if we were trying to photograph this on the 5th of February, you can see that actually the moon is rising over here, it's setting, but it sets before it even gets round. It's set long before it's far enough south to get behind the pin. So you can experiment to find some dates when it's likely to be in the right area of the sky. Generally, just flicking forward on the event button, you're going from, most of the time, you're going from one moon phase to the next moon phase. There's some other events that come in as well. But here's third quarter moon. This is February 24th. And you see this on this date, the moon sets quite far to the south. So let's have a look. This is our first little venturing into building heights and structures. So I've just manually dragged that to where the moon is in alignment with the gray pin. That happens to be in the middle of the day. The moon, as you can see, is plus 25 degrees. So the first question you need to say is, how do I know what altitude the moon would need to be at to coincide with the top of the structure? Well, there's a few different ways to do it. You could, for example, go to this location. You could take out a theodolite or some other instrument that measures angles. You could use the iOS version of TPE, use the augmented reality. You could line up the crosshairs. You could read off the altitude. That's one way of doing it. But you can do it in advance. You can do it in the comfort of your home and at your computer. And to do that, you really want to know something about heights, and you want to know what is the apparent height of the moon relative to the building. So the first thing we would like to know, I think, is how tall is the tower? How tall is this structure here? And generally, for most famous buildings, that information is readily available on the web. Wikipedia has it for a whole load of buildings, and it says height is 107 meters. So come back here. I'm using meters. A metric will switch to feet and inches for the next example in Manhattan. And this is the first of the new tools that you may not have seen before. In Geodetics panel, so I've enabled Geodetics over here. I come down to, I click Edit, and here I can put in some elevation offsets. Now, by default, it will put the height of the camera, and generally the camera is set as the red pin. It defaults to 5 feet there. We're going to put in 1.5 meters, that's about 5 feet. And then we're going to type in, let's remind myself what the value was, 107 meters for the elevation offset at the gray pin. So 107, click update and click close. Okay, so now it's saying the camera is 1.5 meters above the ground, typical tripod height. It doesn't really matter if that was 3 or 0. It's going to make only the tiniest of differences to these sorts of shots, but you can adjust it if you want to be super precise. And then there's the 107 meters that I entered for the gray pin. Having done that, one other thing you can do, and by the way, you don't need to enter this value. It's just convenient to have it in there. You'll see why shortly. If I click this little button here, let me just hover over that, see if I can get the tooltip to appear. No. When you toggle that, instead of showing degrees for the azimuth and the altitude, it's showing the apparent height and the apparent size. So what does that mean? What that means is that if you're standing at the red pin, looking at the gray pin, it tells you, if you were looking at a building that was 937 meters tall, the bottom of that building would be, or the top of the building would be aligned with the center of the moon at this point in time. So it's giving you the apparent height of the moon at the gray pin as viewed from the red pin. And it's also saying that the moon is going to appear to be about 22 meters across. So that means if the building, this notional, non-existent 937 meter tall building, if it were 22 meters wide, it would sit at the center of the moon, and it would be as wide as the moon appears to you, the photographer, over here at the red pin. You can see that, okay, our building's only 107, and this is at 937, so it's way too high. Let's see another way to visualize that quickly. Come over to the sphere, and the sphere, if you recall, gives you essentially a 3D view. So there's your overhead map view. I'm going to zoom out because you can see our gray pin is off here to the outside of the range. That brings it into range. I come here, and hopefully you can all see it's quite obvious in this view. There's the moon. There's the top of the building. So this building is 107 meters tall. So the height of this little generic tall building structure is taken from the 107 meters we put in there. You can see it looks rather large. So if you access the Geodetics edit panel from the sphere page, you'll have the opportunity to edit the footprint size as well. So let's just put that down to 10 meters. That's a bit more plausible, and then things look a bit more reasonable. You may be wondering, what on earth are all these things going on here? Those are little artifacts in the 3D terrain model. So there's what's called the digital elevation model, which gives us 3D terrain that we see here. And those are basically some bad numbers that are still stuck in that model. Some of this data comes from the space shuttle missions of 20 odd years ago. There we are. There's the moon. It's way too high. So the next question you might ask is, well, when can I find the moon at the right height? So let's talk about that. Before I do that, let me just check for some questions. No questions so far. Okay, all good. Next step, visual search. Visual search, if you haven't seen it before, is a way of saying, I would like to see the sun or the moon or the galactic center in this part of the sky, and I want you, the computer, to work out when that's going to happen. So you would basically pin down a location. You will set a target zone. So just to get the sense of it, just in case you haven't seen this before, by default, it says, look for the sun sometime in the next 6 months, and look for it by default due east. So that's a range of altitude. So that's the angle of elevation above the horizon, and azimuth, which is bearing, essentially bearing from true north. I can just search right now for that, and it tells me a whole bunch of results. So 28 days in the next 6 months when that's going to line up. Let's pick this one, and there's the sun in the middle of this target area here that we set. However, that's not what we want. What we want is the moon on top of the Australian Parliament. So let's set that one up. Here's what you do. First of all, we're looking for the moon. We're going to keep the disk alignment at the center of the moon. You can have the moon sitting on top of your target or hanging off below your target. So if you were looking at a photograph, the moon hanging off the underside of a bridge, for example, you might use that alignment there. But we'll just keep to the default for now. I'm going to set it to 5 years. It's good to have a long time horizon, for the moon, because the moon moves around a lot over the years and month to month. So let's set things up. For this particular one, and generally for if you were looking for close alignments, what I would suggest is that you uncheck the range button. So take that off. And by default, the tolerance for these searches is 4 degrees. And 4 degrees, you might say, well, how do I get a sense of what that means? Just remember that rule of thumb is that both the sun and the moon appear to be ½ a degree wide. That's their diameter when you're looking at them in the sky. So this is a tolerance of plus or minus 8 moons or suns. So it's a fairly generous area. And it's reflected in the size of this target here. So I'm going to reduce that down to 1 degree. And that's not a bad one for these type of building alignment shots. You can see that this became much smaller when I changed that down to 1. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say use Geodetics to set the targets. So I click use Geodetics. And when it does that, let me show you what happened. First of all, the target zone moved from its default due east, and now it's lined up. Here you can see it. There it is. It's lined up directly behind the top of the building. And with the building height entered, remember back here we put in it's 107 meters tall. When you say use Geodetics, it incorporates that into the calculation for what is the target altitude and azimuth that you want, and sets that for you so that all you have to do now is search. So let's click search and see what happens. We get 37 dates when we can get that alignment. So let's just look at a couple of these as an example. See, there's one question, I'll come to that very shortly. Generally speaking, in interpreting these graphs, hopefully you've seen this before, these are little visual clues as to how good a result you got, and that's relative to the tolerance that you set. So these are all pretty good because we only had a one degree tolerance, but the ones that are particularly good are the ones that are in green. So I'll click that one there, and when I select that, it changes the app state to the 25th of October of this year, 6:51 in the evening. And you can see that indeed there is the moon. I'm moving the sphere around. Now, generally, your photograph is taken in this direction. You're here, you're at the red pin, you're photographing off towards the building. But in the sphere page, it's often easier to look back at yourself because everything gets a little bit closer and you can zoom in and get a better sense of what's going on. And there is the moon directly aligned behind the top of the tower. A few more results. Let's have a look here. We've got December 19th. That's another good one. And you can see that as I click through these, there's another good one there. I like this one. This is a full moon, almost full moon. 4:44 in the morning, September of next year. But you can see that these by default have included, it doesn't matter what the phase of the moon is, it doesn't matter where the sun is. If you want to restrict the results further, you can use a filter. So we might say, let's just come back to the first of our results, and I'm going to filter them to say full moon. You see we have 37. I apply the full moon filter, and now we have only 5. So when I go back there, indeed that 23rd of September is the, 28th of September in 2023 is the first full moon result. And it's the best in terms of the alignment from that exact spot. So that's the basics of how you would do this. Let me just check in on the questions here. Fred has asked, and I have a big thank you to Fred because he's been a big help in putting some of these features together in the app, just helping me understand the problems he's trying to solve. And he asks a good question here. Suppose I'm on an elevated structure looking at the building. Do I adjust the camera height at the red pin in the geodetic panel? Yes, that's exactly what you would do. And when you adjust that question, that parameter, sorry, I said question because I'm looking at the question screen. When you adjust that, you'll see that it changes. So let me put in, for example, let's say we were standing on a 107-meter platform. There we are. Now the camera's up there. And if the geodetic difference is much less, it's only 1 degree now. Let me go back to the, I had 1.52 in there before, update that. And now it's 3.55. So yes, you can adjust the height of the camera above the ground. So that could be you're standing on a bridge over a river looking at another structure, or you're in an observation deck in a tall building in Manhattan, or you're on the Sydney Harbour Bridge and looking out at the AMP Tower, or whatever it's called nowadays. All of those, you can set your shooting height by adjusting the setting there. Couple more questions. Let's have a look. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good question, David. Can you set a tolerance on the full moon to ±1 day? You sort of can, but you can't exactly. These filters that we have, they don't work on the basis of time, and that's generally because you know, things like golden hour. I've talked about this on other webinars. It's not an hour. It's never an hour. It might be an hour one day in one place, but it's an approximation. And it's the same with ±1 day on full moons. Just depending on the exact timing of things, you could get better results outside that. So what we tend to do is to use percentages and degrees and numerical data like that. So this illuminated fraction says from 0.95 or 95% to 100% illuminated. And that sort of is your plus or minus one day, and you can widen that out if you will. So the way to do what you asked, David, is to use is to adjust the percentages on the illuminated fraction. But this 95% or more is a pretty good equivalent to plus or minus 1 day. Hope that helps. Okay, this is interesting. Two questions more or less asking the same thing, but in different ways. Stephen asks, if you're on a cliff, you need to adjust for the height of the cliff as well, correct? You, the user, don't, because the app already has done that for you. So that is built in. And Raymond, your question is sort of the same one. Canberra is high up. How do you adjust for that? So let me cover that quickly. So back on the map, I'm just going to go back here. The red pin, you can see that up here at the right, it already knows that the red pin is 559 meters above sea level. And that number is used as an input to adjust things like the calculation of atmospheric refraction. It only has a tiny, tiny effect, but it can be an important effect for high precision shots over long distances. So that the impact of being above sea level, it does adjust where the apparent height of the sun and the moon. So that's built in already. What about the gray pin? If I come to this edit screen here, this shows you essentially the elevation offset. So the 601 meters, that's the ground height at the gray pin. And then adding the 107 brings us to 708 meters in total above sea level to the top of the structure. So again, the fact that Canberra is high above the sea level, that's already taken into account. The app checks the elevation of the terrain at each pin location, builds that into the geodetic calculation. So you don't need to worry about elevation above sea level of the ground. The only caveat I would say to that is that it's always worth double checking the numbers that you're getting, because sometimes, excuse me, as we saw with the little visual artifacts in the lake, you can get some odd, incorrect numbers. So do double check that. Let me just circle back, Stephen, on your question about a cliff. In that situation, so for example, the north of Sydney is a good example. Sea cliffs on the the south head of the harbour there. You're probably what, 50, 60 meters above sea level, I would guess. If you put the pin on the cliff, you should see that the sea level or the elevation is been recognized, and it'll say 50, 60 meters, whatever it actually is. If you're a little imprecise in where you drop the pin and you've dropped it just off the edge of the cliff, it could say 0. So in that case, yeah, that would make a difference. So you need to check that you've got your pin placement correct, and you should do a quick sanity check on these numbers. 99% of the time they're fine, but occasionally you'll get some funny numbers coming in. One of the things you can do if you're not trusting this number, if you've got the Pro subscription, you can click there and you can check one of these other data sources. So I can check SRTM1. There we are. So that comes out with a slightly different number, 560. You can check ASTA, different again. GTOPO, generally don't use it. It's low resolution. It's there to cover the Arctic, essentially. That's all it's there for. Google is often the best, and Google gives 556. To view the Google one, you have to have the Google Maps enabled over here. So back to SRTM3, because that's a default. So that's pretty close. 3 meters, it's not going to make a huge difference. We're shooting over, nearly 2.5 kilometers. But it will make a slight difference. So I think hopefully I've answered that, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, shout and I'll try to explain better. So Peter, let me just read your question here. The target building is on a hill. Do I add the height? Oh, okay. No, you don't add the height of the hill. So that's again similar sort of thing. All the ground heights are built in. You don't need to worry about them at all. Good. Okay, so here we are. We're at past. Let's skip over to our second example shot now. So I'm just going to change a few things around to get set up for that. First thing, I'm going to come into settings. We're going to say goodbye to the metric world and back to imperial, or I think that might be, put it into US English and we call it English units. And let's come back to today's date. In fact, what I'm going to go back to, I'm going to go back to 2011 because we're delving into the archives here. So here's this photograph from the Atlantic, quite a striking shot. This was taken on May 6th. Here's what we know about the photo, taken on May 6th, 2012. And down below here, it says, the full moon rises over the skyline of Lower Manhattan and One World Trade Center in New York, as seen from West Orange, New Jersey on May 6th, 2012. So the goal of this next section is, this is a random example. You could find your own examples online, see if you could do the same thing as we're going to do together with this shot. And we don't know exactly where it was taken from. We don't know exactly what time it was taken. We've got a date and some rough locations. So let's see what we can do working with that to reconstruct this shot. So first of all, let's go to West Orange, New Jersey. No, that's because I've just switched. There we are. That's better. Yeah, it's because I've got my computer set to British English. I think it does bias the results. There we are. There's West Orange, New Jersey. Again, let's get our bearings here. So we're on the east coast of the US. New Jersey is here. New York is here and extending northward up the Hudson. And zoom in a little bit more. So the shot was taken from somewhere out here, and it was of a building somewhere here in Lower Manhattan. So what I'm going to do is roughly find some plausible looking spots, and then I'm going to use the saved locations that I got from before so that I can be sure I don't confuse myself in the process of showing you how this works. So you click on satellite maps. When I looked at this, which first looked at this a month or so ago, for a talk I was doing for Fred's Photography Club, I thought this might be a good example because they're located in Long Island, so this part of the world. And I haven't been to this location before, but when you look at it, you go, hold on, this looks plausible. It seems like some sort of park space, open space. And indeed, if you click here, this is basically how I did this. I thought that looks plausible. Let's have a look, see what's on Google Street View, drop the pin, and you go, oh, okay, well, that was a bit of a foggy day. However, it looks like there's a clear view over this railing, and I know that's pointing east, southeast towards Lower Manhattan. So you think, yeah, that's probably a reasonable spot. Let's just assume that the shot was taken somewhere around there. Now let's go find the other piece of the puzzle. I'm going to zoom out to do that. So Lower Manhattan, I'm going to zoom in. It's somewhere down the bottom end. There's World Trade Center. And if you zoom right in, so there's One World Trade Center, which is the tallest building, which back here was, I think, that's still under construction there and there, I believe. And sort of just make out some cranes, I think, on the top there. And this building here, that's actually 4 World Trade Center. And I think if I come over to Wikipedia, there's a good way of sort of verifying that. If you go 4 World Trade Center, there it is. And there's a photograph of it, that building there. Now just look at this one with the little domed roof, then come back to the photo. There's the domed roof. So that is 4 World Trade Center. So that seems to be a good building for us to use for planning this shot. So I'm going to zoom out a little way. No, not that far. I'm going to enable Geodetics. I'm going to come onto a regular map so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to drag it to somewhere here, and then I'm going to zoom in so I can see it just a little bit better. There it is, 4 World Trade Center. So I want to drop the pin somewhere on the building. Generally, if you, again, being super precise, drop it on the side that's closest to you, the photographer, simply because at this distance, it makes barely any difference at all. But if you were closer to the building and it's a large footprint building, then you really want the far side of the building, it will recede further than the near side. So for getting your alignment spot on of the moon sat on top of the building, for example, you want to measure it to the side you're looking at, which is that side there. So let's come out here again. There's our shot setup. We've got our old building heights from Canberra in here at the moment, but we'll fix that shortly. One interesting thing to note is that this photograph was taken over a distance of 13.5 miles. So it's quite a long distance shot. So let's put in a few details. So I got from Wikipedia, again, Wikipedia is great for this. Building is 4 World Trade Center is 978 feet tall. So I'm going to plumb that in, 978. Oh, I'll do that on the sphere page. Let me just get my locations first. So I'm going to set the exact ones that I saved. You'll see they're very close, hopefully, to what I just dragged and dropped. There you are. That's this is just a way of making sure I'm getting consistent results for giving this demonstration. I come to the sphere. We're back in 2011, remember? So here we are. I'm going to zoom out. There's the map view. And turn the lights on. We happen to be at night, where we need to zoom out a little bit to bring the pin back in. There we are. Now I'm moving around. There's the gray pin. There is the red pin. That's our shooting location. So we're shooting in this direction. Let's put in the building height next and see what that looks like. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to clear all of this stuff, and I'm going to show you how to do it without, and then we'll do it later, because there's one other little interesting thing you can learn doing that. So I'm going to enable visual search. We've got our old results from Canberra. We're looking for the moon. We'll do it over 5 years. First thing we're going to say is use Geodetics. So I click, remember range was already unchecked. I'd already reduced my tolerance. Click use Geodetics. A couple of interesting things happen, all right? First of all, it's looking for a negative altitude. And you think, well, why is it doing that? It seems a little odd. But it's because the red pin is at 600 feet above sea level. 600. Our tripod is, we're assuming, 605. And the elevation in Lower Manhattan at ground level is only 13 feet. So that's why it's a slight downward sloping angle from that viewpoint. But of course, we're looking for something somewhat higher. So recall that the height of the building of 4 World Trade Center, which is where we're aligned, is 978 feet. So now I'm going to type 978 in here. And what that then does, it adjusts the altitude. And now we have a positive altitude, which makes sense. If I were to click search, I'll do it, and I'll show you something that you may stumble across, and it's good to know how to fix it if you do. It's going to complain. And it complains saying the tolerance must be between 1/100 of a degree and 0.5 of a degree. And you go, well, what's it complaining about that for? That seems odd. What it is it's related to the way the visual search works. What it does, it makes the computer do what it's really good at, which is crunch lots of numbers very quickly. But it works between the moment of moonrise to when the moon gets to its highest altitude, and then either that little segment or the segment where it's from its highest altitude, its culmination, back to moonset. And one problem is, because this is such a low value, 0.23 of a degree, taking 1 degree off that, so the plus or minus 1, puts us before moonrise. So all I'm going to do is just quickly change that to 0.5 and we'll be good. And we will click search. So we're starting in 2011. We've got our target set up. Click search. We'll see what we get. Oh, and I had a filter on. Well, the filter was for a full moon. That's actually fine, because there we have Sunday, May the 6th, 2012. at 9:05 p.m. And you'll see that with a 0.5 degree tolerance, that's still a pretty good result. And if I zoom in, or not zoom in, if I adjust my little camera, so I'm using my trackpad here. There you are, you see, we haven't entered a building height here. We just used the target height in the visual search input of the 978 feet. Let me put this in now. Now you'll see how these things tie together. I'm going to put in 978, update, and there it is. The moon is sat at the top of 4 World Trade Center. There's, I'm just trying to adjust this. Sometimes it gets a little bit excitable when you get too close in. But that's how you get the results. Let's look at what else we can do here. At 9:05 p.m., if I click, remember in the chart legend, you can get apparent heights and apparent sizes of the building. So this is saying relative to the geodetics pin, the moon is 5 degrees higher. So basically where the center of the moon is only 5 degrees above the top of, sorry, 5 feet above the top of the building. So that's pretty good result, I think. The apparent size is another interesting one. It says 690 feet. So back on locations here, one of the things I worked out before is what's the rough footprint size of the building. And in Wikipedia, this is notes I copied and pasted. It gives you the height to the roof, the top floor, the floor count, floor area. And if you sort of roughly divide that out, you can get the footprint. It's basically about 180 feet each side, this building. So if we go back to the sphere page, and we'll put that in, 180, that's at the gray pin, update. What that does, it changes the scale of this little miniature generic tall 4 World Trade Center building that we've got. But you can sort of see that now, if I come back here again, if the building's 180 feet across, the app is telling us that the moon is going to appear 690 feet across when you're viewing it from way over here. And if we go back to the photograph, you can see that, yes, the moon is roughly 3 to 4x the width of 4 World Trade Center. So you can use this apparent height and apparent size value to get a sense of scale as to what how your shot will appear. Obviously, you've got to choose the right lens, and we know that from 13.5 miles away, a long lens is going to be what you want. So that's using the apparent size. And finally, you can always adjust these values. You can adjust altitude directly if you like working in degrees, or you've got some sighting instrument that's giving you a degree of altitude. You can type that in. But you could also say, well, look, I know the building is 978 feet tall, but I'd like it, I've already put it in, I've put the building height in now. I would like the moon to appear 100 feet above the top of the building. That will adjust the altitude. I'm just slightly puzzled as to why it's gone to -275, but I guess I'll work that out later. But you can use either the target height there, or you can put the target height into the geodetics form here. Generally, this is easier, and it gives you that little visual clue in the sphere as well. Okay, let me check in on questions. Let's have a look. Okay, Stephen asks, are these same tools on the iPad version? The answer is sort of. If you, in the iOS version, if you go to the shadows page, you can type in building heights there. So it actually breaks it out into both an offset and an object height. And you'll see those, if you have geodetics enabled in the iOS version, you'll see a little elevation profile, and it will visually indicate the height of the buildings at each end of that. So that's the equivalent in iOS. Graham says, perhaps target height should be 978 plus 100 for the moon. I think that's exactly right. Thank you for telling me how to use this software, but that's correct. That's what we wanted. So the target height was always from the ground. It's not from the top of the building. I'm confusing myself. So yes, 1078. Thank you, Graham. Another question from Stephen. Doesn't the lens magnification affect the relative size of the moon and the building? No, I don't believe it does. Hopefully I'm not confused on that point, but here's a way of thinking about it. You often see, and I bet many of you have experienced this, you take a wonderful photograph of a large moon with a telephoto lens next to a building, and somebody says, photoshopped, and you go, oh, so again, here we go. No, it's not photoshopped. And I was thinking in preparing for this webinar that if you said to somebody, if you were to walk 2 miles, stand and look at the moon. Okay, now turn around, walk 2 miles back, turn around, look at the moon. Does the moon look smaller? They'll say, no, it doesn't. Okay. If you then said to them, look at a building, okay, now turn around, walk 2 miles away from it. Does the building look bigger or smaller? Well, it looks smaller, and everybody's going to agree. So I think if you think of it that way, with distance, buildings become smaller, but the moon's distance is already so far away from the Earth that the 2 or 3 or even 13 miles you've walked across the surface of the Earth, it makes no difference. So I think it's purely an effect of distance from the building. How much of it you can capture in your field of view on the camera, that is affected by the focal length of the lens, but not the relative size. That's dependent on your distance from the building and your distance from the moon, which is more or less a constant, most things considered. Hopefully that helps, Stephen. Let's have a look. George says, would disk alignment set the moon atop the building? It would not. No, it would put the center of the moon at the top of the building. So if you want to get if you want it sitting on top of the moon, use this disk alignment here. So let's just go back. Let's do a little experiment here. We're going to reset. We're going to use Geodetics. So it's top of the building back in 2011, but this time we're doing a disk alignment to the top. Just sanity checking everything. I think we're good. So we'll do search. And we still get May the 6th, okay? This is good. This is a good example. But you can see it's not exactly the same because you can visually see that the moon is higher and the alignment doesn't occur until 9:07 p.m., which is 2 minutes later than the last one. And it's saying it's a little bit off kilter, and you can see that visually looking back through this. But now you can see that result has put the bottom of the moon in line with the top of the building. So that's what those disk alignments are. Think of that one as sitting on top of, aligned with, in the center, hanging underneath. Hopefully that helps, George. Okay, let me look at the next one. Peter asks, is it safe to assume TPE does not know the height of potential obstructing buildings? That is correct. It does not. It does not know that. That's why you're entering these things in here. At some point down the road, maybe we'll have building heights and 3D buildings all over the place. But even then, I think, generally speaking, if you're planning a shot that's pretty specific in terms of the alignment you want, it's good to have control of the inputs of those heights. Often the databases are out of date or incorrect, sometimes incomplete. Certainly with building footprints, they're somewhat approximate. And often buildings of complex shapes, a lot of the databases that have building heights, they work basically by extruding a footprint. So there might be, say, a squarish footprint that simply gets extruded up. And of course, if you're looking at something like the #1 Vanderbilt building in Manhattan, which is I think a relatively new building, that has quite an interesting structure, and the footprint varies a lot as you go up. Same with the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, that sort of thing. I believe also Peter said the building looks like it might have been taken from a rooftop to get over the buildings in Jersey. I don't think it was. I think it's a clear line of sight from that location. But Fred, if Fred's still on, he can confirm that for me one way or the other, because I know he's shot from that location too. Okay, so Stephen, I'm going to take another one of your questions. Lots of questions from Stephen coming in. It's great. Where does TP get the angles of the various heavenly bodies? They are all calculated by the code that's run as part of this app. So when you're using the web version or the iOS version, the algorithms to calculate that are built into the app itself. And they're derived from some published algorithms in a book called Astronomical Algorithms, written by a Belgian gentleman called Jean Meus. I think that's how you pronounce his name. So that's where they come from. Graham, thank you, confirming my understanding of relative sizes of moons and building heights. That's just based on distance. And Fred, thank you, confirms no building obstructions from that spot. And yes, Stephen, your question, is it a clear line of sight from Eagle Rock to One World Trade Center? Yes, it is. So that's I'm pretty close to where that shot was taken, I'm guessing, but we don't know exactly where it was. The other thing to note about this, and I think it comes from that little experiment we just did with the disk alignment piece, you can see that changing just disk alignment, sit on top to be centered, makes only 2 minutes difference in time. So generally what you can do is don't get over specific in the planning around this, because as long as you understand what you can do as a photographer on the ground, if you have lateral movement, which let's remind ourselves we absolutely do have here in West Orange, New Jersey, you can see that you can move around a little bit from this position to adjust the exact angle, and you may be able to move at the time to reposition and grab another shot. And I'm sure many of you have done that before. The issue might be, on supermoon evenings, if it's crowded, you might be elbowing other photographers out the way. Or if it was somewhere like Mesa Arch in Utah, if you've ever been there, there's literally room for about 8 photographers side by side max to get the shot, and beyond that, you're ducking and diving to try and find the position. So yeah, that I think is everything I wanted to cover. So let's just a quick recap of what we looked at today. The main things I'd like you to recall are: 1, the ability to edit building heights or your shooting height above the ground here in the Geodetics panel using these new elevation offsets. Secondly, the ability to look at the apparent size of the sun and the moon and the Milky Way. It gives you the apparent height. It doesn't give you the apparent size of the galactic center, because that's a little bit meaningless. But you can get all of those metrics from here when you have Geodetics enabled. It will give you all these apparent height information. So that's down here in the chart legend. And then thirdly, in the sphere, the ability to set building footprint sizes and to get a rough visualization of a generic tall building. I think I might have some other ones to add to this before too much longer, but this little visual indication here in the sphere of the tall building. And then finally, the ability to enter a target height relative to the ground. Thank you, Graham, to configure your targets in Visual Search. That's about it. Grace is sharing a tip for those of you close to New York. There's a crest hill, quite large in size, where there's another hill somewhere in that location with a very clear view of New York City. I have to go there one time. I've been to New York any number of times, but never ventured out with my camera out to Jersey to try to shoot it, but it would be fun. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. We're coming up on 6 o'clock. So thanks again for joining, and we'll be doing more of these. So I hope to see you at a future event. Thanks again. Bye-bye.